Good morning, everybody, to this ISBSG webinar. I'm Luigi Buglione, the ISBSG Vice President, and I give you the welcome from the whole organization to this new talk speaking about the contribution of measurement into the new ITIL4 version. That is the latest version for the most wide and spread framework about service management. But in the last version, version 4, is going to introduce the so-called guiding principle. There are 7 very interesting principles introduced for a good management of your service management projects. The goal for this presentation, of course, are first of all to introduce the ITIL4 IT service management framework. It's not necessarily known by anybody here, and so a brief introduction to the new framework is due in order to understand the main elements in this ITSM framework and the so-called guiding principle. There are 7 elements, very, very useful. We are going to analyze this time in the light of the measurement objective goals and topics that many of us run in his daily work in order to achieve better business results, of course. The other goal for this presentation is to present some examples about projects that can be sized using not only function points, snap points, lines of code, or any other measure, for instance, also the mean time to restore service. But as you know, is the mean time in order to restore from an incident, from the beginning to the ending, to the closing for an incident, in the operational phase, to look how measuring in a proper way can improve our projects. Seems to be trivial, but is not so trivial since not everybody is applying this kind of concept and best practices worldwide for many, many times. Without showing my face, I'm here. I'm a measurement people, as many of you. I'm currently working for DXC Technology in Rome, Italy. I'm the ISBSG Vice President, one of the IFPAC Director, and the President for the Italian Association on Software Metric. But the point is not to speak about myself, but to start and to use these 50 minutes approximately in order to introduce basically what we are going to call the 1-2-3 schema. That means that any contract typically from a service management perspective has 3 main chunks or 3 main sub-projects that can be, first of all, the development, followed by the operational phase, and then by the maintenance series of activities in a sort of continuous improvement over time. So this is the basic picture, and we wrote a paper a time ago, 2017, on a project management journal in Italy, because often there is a misconception about when and how, for instance, function points can be or cannot be applied, whatever kind of. And so if we are going to match the definition, the glossary from a service management perspective with the typical glossary in the project management domain, joining the 2 knowledge domain can return us a complete picture, because any contract has this external boundary, 3 moments in time, and so it's possible to look, first of all, at an initial phase about the development of an information system. Of course, this development phase must be followed by the operational phase, and so also keeping the acronyms from these 2 main phases can describe what many people can call DevOps, development plus operation. That is, most before than being something technical, is an operation, an organizational concept trying to put together and to work better the 2 main groups who develop, typically business analysts, developers, testers, and then the people working in the operational phase, because the experience of the 2 groups, of course, can improve the other group. And when we are going to speak about maintenance, this is the ISO norm with the maintenance process recently updated. And so here also there is a fifth subcategory in the latest version, dated January 2022, when, of course, corrective maintenance is not able to generate any additional function point, whatever kind of, while the green part often, not always, but often can also produce some functional requirement and therefore also some additional function points in the respective baseline for any project your organization is going to maintain. So since we have the three main phases, this is the reason why we called it the 1, 2, 3 schema. And the interesting thing is that if we are going to use the typical ITIL service management titles in version 3 for the different service lifecycle phases, of course, the development is something about the design and the transition phase in a service management lifecycle, while the operational phase is, of course, something producing only or managing only with non-functional requirements in our measurement language and knowledge domain. And the maintenance is a mixture, of course, of functional and non-functional requirements from the product viewpoint. But since we are going to speak about ITIL, or ITIL according to the way you want to pronounce it, of course, ITIL is the first service management methodology. The first version was dated 87, but of course, also looking eventually the URL under the pictures here, you can see, for instance, 4 of other service management methodology. MOF is by Microsoft, is the Microsoft Operational Framework. IT4IT comes from the Open Group, that is the same organization producing TOGAF and many other methodologies, Archimate, etc. FIT-SM is a lighter method than ITIL for the European community, and CMMI for services was a previous version of CMMI. Currently, it does exist only CMMI version 2 without any specific constellation, because the current version 2.0 from by the Capability Maturity Model Institute is a mixture of development, service, acquisition, and data management. Anyway, this is the reason why we are going to speak about ITIL, and here there is also the hyperlink for going to the axelos.com website, where Axelos is the owner for this methodology. Comes from the last century, is not only from, it does not come from a provider organization, but it was born by the UK government. So it's very, very complete as a process view after the version 2 till the current one. It represents the main input for the ISO 20000 family of standards. That is the basis also for certifying your management system about your services, not only about the production of products. And it is the model, the framework, with the largest base of certified professionals on a worldwide basis. The other interesting thing that is not absolutely trivial is that is the solely framework dealing also with a process for managing the financials within a service management project. And is one of the free inputs also for a DevOps approach, because many of you will know that service management, agile, and lean are the 3 main points depicting a good DevOps approach, because some practices from the 3 different domains can depict what DevOps is at the core, in its core point. Is first of all something about a better organization, and after also a better application of technology and tools. The other interesting thing is that, just a moment to look, okay, thank you for the chat, for chatting some details about you. Please don't stop during the presentation if you want. Is that since we are people measuring, it's important to stress that in the current model containing 34 processes, there are in particular two processes about measurement and reporting, as well service level management. On this point, from this point on, of course, the goal for this presentation is not to detail all the ITIL framework, but to keep the basic from the latest version, version 4, and to focus the rest of the presentation about one of the new elements brought in the latest version by Axelos. So currently, in a different way than version 3, and so version 4 was dated 2019, at the base, at the foundation of any service management process, there should be the so-called 4-dimensional service management, that are organization and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, value stream and processes. And only managing in a proper way and measuring in a proper way these that are the 4 main drivers for having at the foundation a very good, or creating the basis for a very good service management results and creating value as the final result from the 4 perspective, we have to start from here, but not forgetting what are called the 6 external factors, the so-called PESTLE factor, PESTLE or PESTLE, according to the different pronunciation. So a very good service management or any project will achieve a good result if there will be a series of constraints taken into account from the beginning about political factors, economical factors, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors. Because, please, for instance, my company, DXC, had premises also in Russia and Ukraine till a couple of years ago. Right now, there is the war, unfortunately. And so also plenty of people were moved for these 2 parts of our organization to other countries safer in this period. For instance, there can be some problems in some countries for any company playing with global roles. And so the economic factors must be taken into account also for outsourcing good practices in order to take advantage and to keep into account people from different parts of the world look into their fares. But it's important also to harmonize the processes in order to obtain value from our service projects, looking also to social factors. And one of the latest webinars we had a few days ago in IFPAG, in the International Function Point User Group, for instance, was about diversity and inclusion. That is one of the buzzwords during the last years. Very, very important, because better organization is a mixture of people with from different countries, with different culture, with different sex and way of thinking, because anybody can be valuable and can bring value into projects in a different way. Technology, of course, since we are speaking about ITIL, that means a library of best practice, but mostly using also IT facilities, is fundamental. But please don't forget also the legal factors. It's important in a service to look also the geography where a service project can run. For instance, I'm from Italy, and in this moment, the Italian government, if you love technology, is forbidding ChatGPT because it seems to do not answer properly the organization producing this chatbot with the artificial intelligence is not respecting the GDPR rules we have in Europe. True or false, anyway, in Italy, in this moment, you cannot connect to chat GPT for a few months more. So also this point needs to be considered, as well as environmental factors also to be interpreted in terms of how the organization works, the way the people works. So imagine after the pandemic period, many of us still work at home. Many of you are based in a country and works necessarily with people in other parts of the world, and so also the online work is changing also the performance of a project and the value. So these are the basic elements, the 4 dimensions, that necessarily needs to be at a higher level, needs to be interpreted at the light of 5 elements in the so-called service value system, the SBS. That means that any service management project must start from an opportunity kept from the market, your reference market, or because somebody is going to ask you to introduce some more functionality, for instance, in a software. Of course, from the input, the output will be a more valuable service based possibly on a software or anyway on a combination of elements of assets from your organization. What we are going to discuss today are not the service value chain. That means in the IT language the different phases on a service management life cycle: the engagement, planning, design and transition, obtain, build, deliver and support, and improvement. But even if we have 5 different elements in the service value system, our attention will be about the guiding principle, that there will be something more interesting to be analyzed right now, because a good service is a combination of this guiding principle, a good project governance, a good and proper management of a service across the different service management lifecycle phases, the processes that currently had changed their name and now are called practices, and a very continual improvement approach to the service management of your product and services. If we are going to take these 3 new concepts, and if you think to put these elements as they were a sort of building, the 4 dimension will represent mostly the foundation of a building. The first floor is given by the service management life cycle phases, and the service value system is the first floor, and the second floor is the service value chain, the phases in a service management life cycle to be analyzed in order to start from an input in order to produce and put into operation products and service that must return value to customer and in general to any stakeholder. From this viewpoint, is needed absolutely to explain what is meant for value. Value is a very fundamental definition, more and more across the years, and in ITIL it is explained as the summation of utility and warranty. Utility is the what a service will do, that for the software people we are means mostly to represent the what a service must do, functional user requirement. The warranty explains the how and the how much a service must perform. And so if you look also the figure from ITIL, mostly we are speaking about some of the characteristics, not only of non-functional characteristics you can see in SNAP or in ISO 25010 about software quality, and many others. A summation of good utility and warranty levels will return the final overall value. And if we are going to see Utility and warranty as functional and non-functional requirement. The implementation of those two types of requirement is like a yin and yang picture where the summation gives you a higher value to the stakeholders. We wrote also this kind of analysis in some Italian journals. Sorry, if you are interested, it's a free paper, but it's written in Italian. And we are starting to mix more and more the software management, the software engineering knowledge we mostly have and inject in our project with some more information that I hope will be useful. Hello, Patrick. Good morning. Good afternoon. From ITIL and from other service management practice, and today we'll speak about one of the new components from ITIL4. The guiding principles are 7, originally 9, currently 7, principles that can lead one after the other, can lead your project to achieve better results. And so this is the path we're going to follow during the next 30 minutes. And the interesting thing is that if focus on value is the number one and optimize and automate is the latest one, the interesting information you will see is that also from a software engineering viewpoint, you can automate partly your processes in order to save time and to achieve a better result, but not always. And right now, for each one, the 7 guiding principles will state, of course, the main points from ITIL, and then for each of the 7 guiding principles will provide, of course, some suggestions, some tips from a measurement perspective. That's why this picture in the bottom part of the slide. By the way, before going on, can you hear me in a proper way or not? I'm sufficiently good enough in order to speak in English, even if I'm not a mother tongue English people? Yes or no? Please write me in the chat, because otherwise I'm not sure to be comprehensible by anybody. Okay. The most important thing is that just Paula is from Australia. All the other people telling me I'm speaking good, I'm good in English, are always not mother tongue people. Okay, just for kidding a bit. Let's start with principle number 1. Focus on value means that from a strategic initial early phase in my project, the organization should look at the voice of the customer. VOC, the voice of the customer, means that from a strategical viewpoint, before planning any new project, service project or software project, it's important to hear different voices, not only the business, and to keep the higher number of functional and non-functional requirements in order to reduce scope creep, in order to improve the goodness, to reduce the relative error and improve the estimation for effort and cost for any life cycle phases in your projects, and to reduce possibly any potential rework in your project, because if you start knowing which are your initial assets in your organization, also a good level of rework, of reuse, can be thought from the beginning. And it means to adopt, of course, historical data with function points, whatever kind of, when you are going to deal with functional user requirements, or from a non-functional side, you could use snap points or other measures from, for instance, the ISO 25023 measures. That is the companion guide for the other standard, the 25010, that is about the quality, software product quality model. And here we could have more than 80 KPIs measures about software quality. If we are going to adopt and to establish measurement unit, the second point, start where you are, is just one step later, because the suggestion is to do not start from scratch, but from a measurement viewpoint, to reuse data, to reuse experience, to reuse anything that can reduce also effort and time during time. And since we are people in the measurement field, this is the measurement process in the ISO language. And so maybe you could know this number. I put also hyperlinks and the PDF version of this presentation for those aware, for those willing to look for further detail at the end of the presentation, of course. And so the ISO 15939 from 99 and currently in this version of a few years ago is the measurement process asking to gather your own historical data into, generically speaking, a measurement repository, a measurement experience base. The MEB is the exact title in this ISO norm. But since I'm the vice president for ISBSG, of course, with Paula, with Pierre Almen, the president that is connected with us, and all the other colleagues representing the ISBSG board, we are a no-profit organization born in 1997, so 26 years ago. And we have, as you know, interesting repositories with thousands of projects for representing a benchmarking basis for estimates. The other interesting point, so please go here, become an ISBSG member, or anyway, an ISBG friend by our repositories. Because in this way, if your organization wouldn't have enough data for any benchmarking activity, you could start from here and then having time to gather your own data and to restart in the next period, refining your estimate with your own data, but you wouldn't start from scratch, just moving with estimations by analogy, by experience. That is what typically many people do. It is not necessarily the best way to start with a good estimation. It's better to use data. And we are the owner of many, many data to be shared with anybody interested here. Let's go on. A measurable way for understanding how to plan, of course, your service project could be also to use and to introduce in your organization assessments like in CMMI, in SPICE. That means, of course, to measure the maturity. I am, for instance, the president for the Italian Software Medical Association. I'm a director within the IFPAG Association, but typically we are going to adopt and propose product measure. Another perspective IFPAG is going to face currently with a working group with Rupali Tapar, that is the current IFPAG vice president, is just about the creation of an estimation maturity model, because it's important also to measure processes, not only products and or services. And so this is another interesting point that can help your organization when you're going in this moment in time in your project to do not start from scratch, but to retrieve all the information for improving your project. If you were interested to use a free tool, not an open source, but a freeware, please check here, click here, and this is a free tool by the Griffith University in Australia that can help you to start with your own maturity model, as well as applying directly the CMMI, the SPICE models, and many other known models in the IT domain. So let's go on, because the first point, coming back, is to start from a strategical viewpoint to analyze which are requirements from the functional and non-functional viewpoint from many stakeholders. The second moment in time is to understand before starting, to retrieve and reuse any element, data, processes, knowledge, people that can be reallocated in similar projects over time in order to reuse their own experience. And then it's with GP number 3 is the moment to start. So imagine to have strategically thought to your project, to have number 2, as said before, to have reconsidered all the assets you have and now is planned to work with a project also as a sprint that needs absolutely to be analyzed using possibly iterative life cycle approaches. And so using Scrum, using FTD, using an agile project management method can be very useful because in this way you can separate, you can divide your very huge project, reducing the risk in sub-projects, but with an iterative logic. And at the end of each Scrum, of each iteration, as you know, it could be very good in order to learn step by step and improve for the next step. It's good to put in action some retrospectives. And of course, there are many books like this one by Ben Linders, that is a Dutch people, very important in the agile community, for instance, suggesting new ways to deal with retrospectives and also ways for measuring the interesting thing, for keeping and retrieving interesting improvement action from retrospective. Another metric you could eventually use from an agile approach is to understand that any sprint, any iteration necessarily needs to be planned in the sprint planning phase using or adopting this metric. That is trivial but is effective because the team load factor, that is the ratio between the real effort and the planned effort, should be always less than 100%. By the way, if you know the 15 puzzle, we can reuse this analogy because if this would be a sprint and if you do not allocate your team at 100% of the real potential effort that they can, this can allow your project eventually to swap a user story with sprint number 2, or eventually to reduce the risk if somebody do not go in a proper way. But if you have, and it is very risky, if you want to go closely to the 100% of team load factor, the risk will increase a lot because it would be not possible to still be possibly on time delivering your output and outcomes at the end of a sprint, and there is the risk to do not respect your milestones. And so, be agile is good, but keep also feedbacks from the retrospective sections and improve over time by experience is fundamental. So it does mean that, for instance, in ISBSG, as well as in many other organizations, we retrieve quantitative data, but it's fundamental also to retrieve possibly qualitative data. Because, and it's important in guiding principle number 4, people is the most important asset we have. And so, if we are not working together in a good way, if we are not sharing information, data, understanding, trust among people, working in a Scrum team, in an Agile team, in a DevOps team, where the trust must be at the higher level, at the highest level than ever, of course, the project will fail or anyway won't achieve the better result it could with better premises. Also, this is another very important point. We are people mostly living and working in IT projects, but people often do not measure HR-related issues, and it's a pity, because if you would like to take a look to the People CMM, this is the latest public version of a few years ago. Or eventually, if you want to read Peopleware, third version, there is a very interesting book by Tom DeMarco and Tim Lister. The latest version is dated 20 years ago, but is no, 10 years ago, is 2013. That is very, very actual. There are plenty of metrics also for controlling, for monitoring the feelings by your project. That means to monitor and improve possibly, also in the ITIL framework, the first dimension and the third dimension, that are the two basic foundation point where a service project is based. And so if your people are very happy to stay there, they won't change the organization, they still work for you. Another way is that happy people will work in a good way, don't creating technical debt, because also look into other way to monitor as the bar down chart as agile people typically do. It's possible to control to be more than using traditional way if you are or not still on time in delivering your output and outcomes according to the plan. And it's important also for DevOps to do not sum many technical debt in order to produce more value from your service projects. Coming back to TLF, the team load factor that can be measured and applied at the personal as well as your team level, it's important to, for instance, to introduce something like this timer. This is my vision, my version of the Pomodoro technique. Do you know what is the Pomodoro technique? Yes or no? Just to know. Please write me in the chat. Pomodoro technique. Somebody yes, somebody no. Okay, just to show you, oops, let's go in here, YouTube. It's something very, very simple. Here there is many, many videos eventually that can be displayed here. Just to show you, just one moment, a simple idea from an Italian people, Francesco Cirillo, that is a very simple technique in order to stay on time in your activity. And if you are going to work on time, delivering the right product and services without losing time, still being on time, is fundamental to track time and to plan the right time for doing things. And so it's important to take a timer, whatever kind of, to plan eventually how much time could be a time unit without being distracted, that Francesco Cirillo called a pomodoro, a tomato. It is an Italian word for not of you is not speaking Italian. And the theory is that task can be broken down into short timed intervals without being interrupted. After a series of tomatoes, it's possible to do a break, but without being interrupted by phone calls, by your colleagues, etc. It would be very, very easy. And now I'm going to place this short video in the chat in order to do not lose time here and come back to my presentation, just for telling you that we can improve our processes, not only measuring function point, lines of code, and something like that, but many, many more information. KPIs can be kept from many dimensions. And so the initial 4 dimensions from ITIL, organization and people, information and technology, partner and provider, value stream and processes can be the basis for your analysis, for your own projects. It doesn't exist, of course, the unique view about how to do things, but you can keep experience from many, many different sources. But after general guiding principle number 4, it is about people. When we are in a project, Before, we need at the strategic point and from a tactical operational viewpoint to look in an holistic way to our project. So it does mean that any service, any product cannot stand alone. And so we need absolutely to look our product, our service with respect to the rest of the ecosystem of application and services our product and our service is working with. So imagine in the IT context, this is the guiding principle asking to create initially, to think, and then to create a new system, thinking to implement it using microservices. Because in such a way, the effort will be reduced, but many small pieces of software can, with less effort and cost, produce more value for many stakeholders, reducing the maintenance effort and costs. And so TOGAF, that's the Open Group Architecture Framework, the same association producing also IT4IT, that is one of the competitor frameworks for ITIL. That's another very good model anyway. TOGAF, for instance, is going to ask not only to architectures as a technical thing, but it looks also to architecture, point out that architecture are organization of information systems and not only technical elements. And the complex does not mean that a system must be complicated. For instance, for us, mostly working with function points, this is another interesting information. As you know, all the standard ISO recognized functional size measurement method must respect a series of standards from this ISO family. The part number 5 for this family of standards, part 5, for instance, depicts the criteria for grouping software into families of software, what we are going to call functional domains. So one web application does not have the same characteristic, effort and productivity levels, nominal productivity levels or PDR levels, than a data warehouse system. An IoT system is not the same that a geographic information system. And so it's very, very useful to look also to older acronym like OOP, the object-oriented programming, look into components. Right now, mostly of these components can be called in a newer language microservices. And so architectures can be something helping a project looking in a wider way to an ecosystem of application to improve values, look into the project, proper project scope and boundaries, reducing to have scope creep too. 12 minutes to go. Are you tired? Yes or no? I'm annoying you or not? Please write me in the chat. Yes or no? Otherwise, I'm stopping here. Not a problem. Okay. Okay, Cinzia and Silvia are friends. So I'm kidding. Let's go on, just for not losing time. Guiding principle number 6 is about always the moment in time when the project is still alive. And from the design to the operational phase in a project, the first time when developed, the next time when it is enhanced, so from in a service management logic, it is important to maintain a service and its products simple and practical. That means to respect the minimum number of steps needed in order to accomplish an objective. So imagine your software product. How many clicks do you need to do on your graphical user interface, for instance, or your mobile interface in order to achieve the primary intent for a writing, for a data presentation, and so on. So it's important in this way to applying some lean management techniques like the value stream mapping, to adopt some diagram like CPOC, that is an acronym standing for Supplier Input Processing Output Customer. And here, if you want to go deeper in this presentation, I try to put some hyperlinks for going on just after the presentation yourself. But it's important to look, for instance, to what can help us in reducing the steps, obtaining the same value, also reducing the effort for obtaining the same results. Downtime, also looking to this acronym, just to show you another interesting thing, can be that downtime, the lean management language, means that some form of waste is to be reduced are the defects, the overproduction, the waiting times, the non-used talent from the people we have in our team, the transportation, in this case of data and information, to reduce the number of assets not needed in an inventory, in an asset management perspective, to reduce the motion of people that after the pandemic we have reduced a lot, unfortunately, reducing all the many travels we did before. And finally, the extra processing, so producing more than requested in a project. So it's very important to respect some of these good practices, not strictly from the software management field, but for instance from the lean management that can be measurable in order to improve also this step. And when a final user is satisfied by your product or service, of course, also speaking accessibility, usability. And so, for instance, it's important to use and apply it to measure possibly your software. Also look into the web content accessibility guideline. Currently, the current version is 2.1. There is yet a draft 2.2 version that will be put in production in May this year, but there is yet produced a draft of the version 3.0 because the different way to interact with users is going on daily. And so it's very interesting to look to this non-functional requirement in order to produce better systems. Okay, 7 minutes to go, and we are going to produce the last and to discuss the last guiding principle. That it seems to be, to many IT people, the final definitive suggestion. But please, automation must be applied only to low-risk, high-repetitive, pre-authorized tasks, what in service management we are going to call standard changes, because something that is repeated daily, that has no risk or low risk, and after the first authorization can be pre-authorized. Imagine when your daily are going to pass your badge, authorization badge, to enter into your company premises. It's something that can be automated. But when you have an emergency change, so something to be done just after the authorization of a physical manager, that kind of things cannot be automated. It's too risky to do that. And so automation can be good, but for instance, is a personal perspective, function point cannot be automated, whatever kind of. You can partly automate UML documents in order depicting functional requirements for approximating function points. But those software, for instance, that are going to backfiring lines of code into function points, my perspective is that is not a good automation. While there can be, for instance, many more opportunities to automate something in the non-functional side of a software project, look into the static code repositories, because you can use a SonarQube, you can use many other tools eventually like this one, or other eventually in the UML domain, also using, there are many tools also applying UML notation for sizing cosmic function points for the cosmic community. There is something good, but must be this kind of characteristics. And another interesting thing to note eventually is that when we are going to manage a new data set, the elementary processes to consider often are at least 5, not 4. There is the final list of all the records for a certain logical element to be listed, and often a machine learning algorithm can confuse verbs, not determine the right granularity when analyzing a functional requirement. And in our logic, an AI algorithm right now could depict a lower number of elementary processes. So my fear in this case for those of you measuring function points, that in this moment, to leave to a machine this kind of automation feature, my opinion is that can be risky. So fast and cheap, but not good, is never a positive combination. Do you know this kind of picture? Good and cheap is okay, but going slow. Or otherwise, cheap and fast is okay, but is bad, etc. So these are the three main characteristics for any product and service project. But you can keep 2 out of 3 and never 3 out of 3. So you have to balance which is the right balance for you. And so 4 minutes in order to finish our presentation with, sorry, the animation wasn't good, for finishing our presentation. First of all, please, if you are a project manager, don't think that service management is an enemy. Service and project management best practices are a unique thing to be seen together. So a project is not only, as in PMBOK, a temporary endeavor, blah, 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 only look into the development part. But it's very, very important to look at project as in the 1, 2, 3 schema. So a series of moments in time that can be the development, the operational, and the maintenance sub-moment in time, to be looked, to be analyzed as a unique project in the medium long term. The final value is not to produce function points, lines of code, and measures. The final point is to go to find and to search for value from the eyes of a customer, from the eyes of a final user, from the eyes of several stakeholders. And if we we will be able more and more over time to obtain a win-win situation, the better for anybody. And non-functional requirements are the black oil to be still discovered, whatever the way to measure non-functional requirements. Another interesting thing is that, for instance, this kind of taxonomy, and here there should be a link also for reading a paper we wrote with Christopher Bird, that is a German people, a very expert people in measurement from many, many years from Alcatel, is the entity attribute measure taxonomy that can help you to understand in your measurement plan if you are going to measure, track, and monitor a right number of KPIs of measures or not, too much or too few, and eventually where you are failing or where you are good enough for controlling and improving your projects. The other important point is about competencies and skill. Just before the end of June in Italy, we are going to create a new, brand new certification, and then in a few months will be available also in English on the worldwide level by GUFPISMA, the Italian association, that is based on this national standard for creating the skill and competence for a measurement specialist. Because before being certified for counting function points, snap points, other metrics, it's important to have the basic knowledge about how to deal with measures, how to gather data, how to analyze data. And so this new certification will speak about it also for in ISBSG as well as in other contexts and association. will be possibly the foundation certification, very simple but effective, in order to grant organization and BITs and customers to have in their teams people looking in a good way, not only to count, for instance, function point, but also to hire people able to deal in a proper way with service levels, to take the right information from a good tracking over time of your KPIs, also for the operational part of your service management projects. And so just for concluding in this last 43 seconds in my Pomodoro technique here in the right corner up in the screen, the idea was to propose the guiding principle for ITIL4 as a basis for providing recommendation valid for any circumstance based on a common sense logic that can be measurable for people like us in order to improve results. Because the most important thing is to do skip what a boss is going to ask and try to be like Dilbert, that is a software engineer that of course is trying to do the best, but if your management possibly is not being aware about what you can do for improving the projects, also for allowing him, that is the boss, to give you the right budget to do that kind of activity, also the result for the boss will be worse than ever. If the boss will comprehend your suggestion, and if this is another way to look DevOps, like he could be the dev and the engineering was the ops, this interchange of ideas can be reflected in better results obtained by less effort, less cost, and higher value for all the stakeholders.